so people don't get confused, they call it the Edinburgh of the South, just in case you've got to the wrong place. Ascension Island is an American Air Force base. It's rented by the Americans, so you can't go there unless you've got work. But quite a lot of Saints work up there. Our grandson worked there for about 6 months on the American Air Base. It's a long way from anywhere. Tristan is generally regarded as the most isolated inhabited place on Earth, but St Helena is not far behind. It's about 2,000 kilometres from anywhere. It's a long way. To get to St Helena, you fly to Johannesburg, which is over here somewhere. We went via Sydney, which is the shortest route. And then you've got to spend the night in Johannesburg because there's only one flight a week from Johannesburg, and you fly to St Helena. But on the way to St Helena, you stop at Walvis Bay in Namibia to refuel. The reason being is if they can't land at St Helena, which happens about 10% of the time, mainly because of cloud, they have to turn back again. So they've got to take on enough fuel because there's nowhere else to go. So they can get back to Johannesburg. That happened to the flight last week. So that's how you get to St Helena. Surprisingly, they have a very, very good internet. The Google cable, the Equano cable, has a branch that goes to St Helena, which the British government paid for. This blue one's not been built yet, but they have a great big internet cable, and they're very good. They have fibre in Jamestown, but not in the hinterland. And part of my son's job, which is he's Director of Investment and Development, which is a very grand title, but the population is about the same as Stonefield. So, you know, but part of his job is to encourage digital nomads who want to drop out and you know, work from remotely, and they can do that with the good internet. It's south of the equator. It's classified as tropical, and it is tropical certainly at sea level, not so much in the higher regions. What is St Helena? I say they're grouped together with Ascension and Tristan. It's a British Overseas Territory, or a BOT. They used to be called dependencies, which was a bit insulting, so now they're British Overseas Territories.
You've got a volcano?
Sorry?
You've got a volcano?
Yeah, well, I'm getting to that.
Oh.
The reason that they exist is that the Ascension, Tristan, and St Helena are all on the junction of the South American and African tectonic plates, so they were volcanic in origin. Tristan is still active, but St Helena and the Ascension is not. These are the other BOTs. You've probably heard of some of them. The Caicos Island, the British Indian Ocean. That was meant to go back to Mauritius recently, but Mr. Trump didn't like that because he likes to have an airfield to bomb places from. So that's in abeyance. But you've obviously heard of Gibraltar and so on. Some of them operate as very dodgy tax and business centres like the Virgin Islands and so on. St Helena never wanted to do that, so they're trying to become self-sufficient on the basis of tourism and other projects. At the moment, all the BOTs are self-sufficient except for Montserrat and St Helena, but they're trying hard to get out of that. The British government just they have an annual budget, and this year it was £37 million, about 80 million New Zealand dollars, which keeps the place afloat.
Got a hospital?
I'll get to that. There'll be plenty of time at the end. Okay. Brief history. It was discovered by a Portuguese explorer de Nova in 1502. Different from many other isolated islands, its history goes back a long, long way. This thing doesn't work all that well. It was uninhabited. The Portuguese had brought in livestock and planted a few trees, but they didn't stay there. They built a chapel and some houses, and basically they used it as a sort of staging point going to and from the West Indies and South America and so on, because they have good fresh water supplies. they put goats and so on ashore, so if you needed food, you could stop off at St Helena and get some. But they kept the location secret. What's wrong with this thing? Needs a new battery, I think. Thomas Cavendish was the first Englishman to get there in 1588, and they started to use it as a base to attack their enemies at the time. And it was briefly claimed by the Dutch, but they didn't stay. In the early 1600s, the British East India Company started using it as a place to support their ships going to and from the East Indies, the spice trade, basically. The British East India Company was like a country. They had a bigger standing army than Britain, and they had possessions all over the place, and they were very, very profitable. Huge money in the spice trade. Maybe the mouse will work better. This is St Helena in the sort of mid-1700s. It looks much the same today. That's Jamestown, and they had fortifications there, another big fort up there. And at its peak, about 1,100 ships a year were calling at St Helena because it was the only place in the Mid-Atlantic where you could get good supplies of water. And they also had plantations there. They grew a lot of taro, although they call that yams on St Helena for some reason, which is a good food for ships because it keeps them, it's carbohydrate. And so a lot of people were stopping off there. Once the age of steam came in, the importance of St Helena declined. And Napoleon was exiled there from 1815 to 1821. It became a crown colony in 1834 when the British East India Company gave it up because they didn't need it anymore. The early 1900s, 6,000 Boer prisoners from the Second Boer War ended up there. It was a much better place to be. The British actually invented the term concentration camp, and a lot of the Boer prisoners were kept in concentration camps in South Africa, but the ones who came here had a much better deal. It became a semi-self-governing entity in 1988. The governor, who is there on a rotating basis, is in charge, but they have like an Iraqi local board, but they have a Minister of Health and a Minister of Housing and a Minister of this and a Minister of that, and a big civil service. About 50% of saints are actually on the government payroll, including my son and grandson. In 1817, there were about 4,300 people there. Interesting, 1821 white inhabitants, 820 garrison. That was when Napoleon was there, and they really increased the garrison because they were quite worried about them being sprung by the French. There was 600 odd Chinese indentured labourers who built all the roads, 500 freedbacks, and 1,500 slaves. I'd never been anywhere before that was built by slaves. It was quite confronting.
Well, the United States was built on that.
Yes, but haven't really come across that much. But here they're very open about it. Anyway, so the population was about 4,300. This year, it's about the same. There's about 4,000 saints and 300 to 400 expats called TE workers, technical expertise. They're the doctors and the dentists and senior nurses, senior police, lawyers, and so on. They tend to be British, and they go there on 2-3 year contracts and supply the technical expertise. The population is declining. There was 12 births and 71 deaths last year, so they've got a bit of a problem. We are trying to encourage immigration. So what does it look like? Well, this is St Helena. It's 122 square miles, just a bit bigger than Waiheke. To give you, there's 140. Oh. Ah. No. I don't know.
Back on the keyboard, just did it up again now.
Always something goes wrong. Right, try again.
Up and down arrow. On the right hand side, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right, back to this point. So it's 140 km road. You can't drive round the island, as you'll see in a minute. It's incredibly rocky and high cliffs. The roads, that's Jamestown down there. The roads tend to go in and out, but you can see. I mean, we had a little hire car. It's quite fun driving in St Helena. You hardly ever get out of second or third gear. Very narrow, incredibly twisty, lots of blind corners. Everybody drives on the horn. You keep your horn. There's actually no, very few accidents, and no one wears seatbelts for some reason, except me. You okay?
It's not working. Did you flick the switch?
It's working inside.
Not working outside. It's on.
Okay, how's that?
Good.
Sorry. Right, where's the mouse now?
Everybody
Sorry about that. Anyway, there's, yeah, and the high point is Dinah's Peak, which is in the middle here. It's quite high, but up to about 600 metres. This is Jamestown here. As you can see, it's in a deep valley, but luckily it runs more or less east-west, so they get sun all day. Bottom part of Jamestown is mostly administration. Some people live up the top. This is Half Tree Hollow, which is the main inhabited place. Our son Michael lives over in the back country here. That's Jamestown from the other end. That's the hospital there. 55-bed hospital. We've got about 5 doctors and a couple of surgeons and a dentist. It's the NHS, so it's all free. I spent about an hour and a half there. One of my hearing aid tips came off and got stuck in my ear, and it took me an hour and a half to get it out. It was quite exciting. So they've got, I've got a pharmacy. They have very good treatment. My son had a root canal last year. It cost him £8. There's 2 roads out of Jamestown. This is Ladder Hill, which is very scary, lots of blind corners, and this one's called Side Path, which is steep but not so scary. This is the old port. This is the World Heritage listed. It's the oldest working island port in the world. These buildings go back 300 years, some of them, and they're actually moving the port. They built a wharf when they built the airport, and they're moving the port around the corner. But everything came ashore here up until recently. The red building there is the old mortuary. It looks like a magazine to me. This is the yacht club, which is built into the cliff. They're going to repurpose these buildings as a sort of tourist venture. And the buildings are all built into the cliff, so you get a free back wall. It's a seafront. You get a nice sunset in St Helena. This is the customs building. It's quite new. I'm showing you this because they have lots of problems with rocks falling on people and cars and so on. So they got a company of French abseilers in a few years ago, and it cost £3 million, but they've wire meshed all the cliffs. This is the gate. So the front of Jamestown is completely fortified. There's a moat in front. And this is where everybody passes through to get in St Helena. That's where the Queen came through when she visited, and Napoleon walked through there. Stitchbird has said Wirebird, they're very proud of the Wirebird. This is Main Street in Jamestown. Lots of old Georgian buildings built with slave labour, all built with stone. Quite a nice wide main street. There's a couple of hotels. That's one hotel, there's another big one down there. There are no resorts in St Helena like you would get on Hawaii or Fiji or whatever, because there's no beaches to speak of. This is the top half of the town. Lovely old buildings. This is the local markets. My wife and grandson there. The saints are the original coffee-coloured people from the song. Because of the European background, Chinese, freed slaves, they're all very mixed race, all sorts of different hues of people. But they're incredibly friendly people, and they really love their island. The market's not actually used in the market much now, and there's a tiny little farmer's market in there, but they can grow their own food in St Helena, but they actually import most of it, vegetables and fruit, which is a bit silly. But really, trouble is no one coordinates the planting and growing. This is the castle. My son works here. This is used to be the governor's residence, although he now lives in another house here. But this goes back to 1600. This is probably St Helena's most famous thing. It's called Jacob's Ladder. It used to be a funicular railway, and it took supplies and horse dung and all sorts of things up to the big fort on the top here. But once when they built the road up here, it fell into disuse. But they kept the stairs. My daughter-in-law said that they used to go up there to the movies. There's a movie theatre up the top there. And when they came back, they would hook their arms around one side of the rail and their legs around the other and just slide down. People come to St Helena to run up it. There's a wild record, and I've forgotten what it is. But
Never up from those rails.
I didn't go up. This is it from the top. You can see this used to be the moat, but they put a swimming pool in it and sort of tennis court, basketball court there. And further up there, there's a shooting range. The Saints compete in the Commonwealth Games in shooting. That's about it. They also have a cricket team, and they competed in the T20 World Cup in Africa against places like the Gabon and Central African Republic. They didn't get through, but they do compete. And it's lit up at night, which is very nice. That's the sort of waterfront.
How many steps?
I can tell you. 699. It was restored with some money from Lord Ashcroft. Those of you with long memories remember that he's the guy who donated the money to get the Victoria Crosses and other medals back, the ones that were stolen from Wairuru. And he's got the world's biggest collection of Victoria Crosses, and he has an interest in this, and he put up the ransom money that got the medals back from Wairuru. So he's a philanthropic sort of guy. But he must have been there as a child. It's had sort of reminiscent of a Cornish fishing village, which is because it was built by the Brits. That was probably not surprising. Lots of stone, nice little alleyways and so on. These are about 300 years old. These would be the old married officers' quarters. Notice all the joinery is aluminium. Anything wood gets eaten by white ants and termites. So all the houses in St Helena are either old stone or built with concrete block with aluminium joinery. But very pleasant up there. Right, the hinterland. You can have any climate you like in St Helena, or any landscape almost, from barren desert to lush tropical banana plantations and mangoes and so on. This was the view from the house we were renting, and that there is called the barn. So every day I sort of thought of you guys when I saw that. So it's a really nice view, except a lot of the time it looked like that. That's not fog, that's cloud. St Helena has the UK's only cloud forest. About 40% of the moisture that gets into the ground to feed the plants comes from the cloud. So the moisture condenses on the leaves, runs down into the soil. So it's quite cloudy there at above 300 metres, but usually cleared by lunchtime. That was a house we rented, a little two-bedroom house, very nice, and only about $130 a night for 2 bedrooms, which was very pleasant. There's one beach on St Helena, and you can't swim at it because the currents are terrible. It's called Sandy Bay, and there's nothing there except black sand. Lots of really lovely little churches. There's 5 religions on St Helena, and they all like going to church. So it's a community thing, it's support network and so on. I think that was a Methodist church. It's very like New Zealand in many ways, fernery and so on. So this is the kind of mid-level St Helena. This is the sort of cattle country. There's cows and things up there. They have a slaughterhouse on the island, and they slaughter cattle and goats, a lot of goats on St Helena, which of course has devastated the native
Yeah, but they
plants and so on.
generated power.
Sorry?
Power. How's it generated?
I'll tell you.
Alan, come back here, son.
You've got an hour to go. This is a typical road on St Helena. All this narrow, apart from the one that goes to the airport, which is new. Lots of twists and so on. You probably recognise that stuff there. That's New Zealand flax. Once the shipping income kind of died down, somebody had a brilliant idea of planting New Zealand flax, and 40% of the island is now covered in New Zealand flax. And from about 1905 through to 1960, it was a big business. They had flax mills, and they baled up the fibre and sent it to the UK, where it was made into rope and kit bags and so on. Did very well during the wars because we need a lot of rope. But and they also supplied all the string that the post office used to use, that heavy stuff to tie up the letters. But when the synthetics came in, that business kind of disappeared. So the fax is just now a nuisance. That's actually a pub, believe it or not. We didn't actually go in, but so this is what it's like around the coast. It's very rocky, very volcanic, very dry. There's a little bit of green there where their stream runs down, but very hot and dry there. These are all cannons. At its peak, there were 280 cannons on St Helena, and most of them still seem to be there. So if you fancy a free cannon, they're all just lined up there. This is the Boer cemetery. I said there's about 6,000 Boers kept prisoner there, and quite a few of them died just from disease and so on. So the South African government paid to maintain this cemetery. Lots of fortifications. As I said, there's guns everywhere. St Helena was, apart from that brief period when the Dutch came in, was never actually invaded because they made such a good job of fortifying it. So cannons everywhere. All pointing out to sea to keep away the French and the Dutch. They're restoring this wall at Sandy Bay, the one I showed you before. This is another part of it. It was completely walled off, and they had a garrison there to stop people coming to rescue Napoleon. And this is the main fort called High Knoll Fort, and it's huge. And the reason it's huge is it was built to take the entire population of the island. So if anyone ever came to attack them, everybody could come up Jacob's Ladder and take refuge in here. Very well set up fortification. Again, built with slave labour. The slavery. This was from 1829. You could buy slaves or you could rent slaves, and once you'd bought your slave, you could go and buy some rice and grain, and they would carry it home from you. The governor said that in St Helena was a lovely place to be a slave, which was actually bullshit. There were some horrific stories up in the museum there, which I won't tell you about. But anyway, one day he was walking up the main street, and he saw this little girl who had been whipped with an inch of her life, and it gave him a jolt. And he decreed that all children born after Christmas 1818 would be free. Not the parents, just the children. And it took and there was the abolition of the Slave Trade Act. In Britain, slavery was never actually legal in Britain, but they really embraced it in their colonies and so on. Everything was done with slavery, but they had a flush of conscience in the early 1800s and abolished slavery. And because they didn't think it was good to have slaves anymore, they didn't think anybody else should. So they sent down a fleet to the South Atlantic and spent about 50 years capturing slave ships. They didn't take them back to Africa. They took them to St Helena because it was easier, and offloaded them there. So about 25,000 slaves were offloaded at St Helena. The idea was that they would eventually be repatriated to Africa. A lot of them were sick, and of course there was a lot of disease in those days, diphtheria and all those other nasty diseases, and a lot of them died.
You flick the switch again. Are you on?
Oh, the battery's gone flat. Oh no, here it is.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry. A lot of them died. and were buried on St Helena. This is where they kept us. A very early photograph, it must be about the 1850s, in the bay next to Jamestown, called Rupert's Bay. When they put the airport in, they had to build a road up to the top of the island, and they had to go through the graveyard. So they had a project. They brought some anthropologists out from the UK. There's actually a movie about it called Story of Bones, and they exhumed all the graves. They don't have a men's shed on St Helena.
Because of the termites.
So the kids built all the little caskets in their shop classes and in the school, and they've reburied them there. They're in the process of building a memorial and a little museum. So what do you do when you go to St Helena? This is their logo. I don't know if this is working. The thing's flashing. Oh, Christy now. This guy is really important, and the other guy in the hat is Napoleon. Now, it's often said that Napoleon was a short arse, but obviously he's not. You know, he's really, you're laughing at. It's a tall guy like me. So, if you remember your history books, Napoleon, after his disastrous Russian campaign, was abdicated and he was actually given Elba. You have to speak to Alan about Elba. He's been there, but it was a lovely place, and it was actually his, and he was in charge of it, and rode around there doing good works. But anyway, the rush of blood to the shed, and thought he'd like to be emperor again. So he went back to France, and I think the battery's gone. It keeps going off.
Is it? Okay.
I'll just have to shout. Can you find any battery for it? It keeps going off.
Is it? No. Does that work?
No, it's flashing all the time. It's telling you that.
Yeah, the battery's flat.
Let's see if you can find. Let's see if there's a battery in the office.
Okay.
So I'll just have to shout. Sorry, chat. I'll move along here a bit so you can hear me. So yeah, Napoleon is one of the attractions. And a lot of people who are into Napoleon go there. This is Longwood. When he first went to St Helena, he took up residence in a small place called the Briars. This was the lieutenant government's summer house. It gets hot and stinky down in Jamestown in the summer, so the rich people tend to move up to the higher ground, and they extended it all for Napoleon. And he had about I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 square kilometres he could ride along. They gave him a billiard table, but he didn't play billiards. He used it to plan campaigns and work on his memoirs and so on. But it's quite a nice place to be. That was the bed he slept in every night. It was his campaign bed. He didn't like to sleep in an ordinary bed. He only ever slept in his campaign bed. This was his deathbed. They gave him a nicer bed to die on. He died of stomach cancer apparently, although there are various conspiracy theories that he was poisoned, but who knows. This is Napoleon's death mask. There's an organisation on St Helena called SHAPE. It's a sort of sheltered workshop for disabled people, and they make stuff, and they made these little casts of Napoleon's death mask. So I thought that'd be a nice desk ornament. So I bought one. When I got it home, I discovered it was actually soap. And so washing their arse with Napoleon's face seems a little disrespectful. So I'll keep it as an ornament. So yeah, it was quite a nice place to live. He didn't like it very much, obviously, but it was pretty miserable in the winter because it's high up and you get winds come through and cloud all the time. So this is Napoleon's first tomb. This is a lovely walk. Takes about half an hour down to Napoleon's tomb. This is his tomb there. Nothing engraved on it. He wanted Napoleon on the tomb. The governor of the island insisted it be Napoleon Bonaparte. His people, he took 26 people with him, and so he had quite an entourage. They said, no, it has to be Napoleon or nothing, so it has nothing on it. But in 1840, the British were obviously in better terms with the French, and they allowed them to come and take it back. Longwood and the Briars, where he stayed originally, is actually French territory. The French have a permanent presence on the island. I reckon he chose this site because it was a long way from the main road. It took about 14 soldiers to carry the coffin. He was in a tin coffin inside a mahogany coffin, inside a lead coffin, inside another mahogany coffin. So it was a pretty heavy coffin. And then he took him to France. Jack and I went there in 2005 and I took this photo. So I've been to both his tombs, which it must be a double that not many people can claim. Diving's a big thing in St Helena, attracts people to there. They have the whale. It's one of the places in the world where whale sharks come to breed, and they were there when I was there in February. And I was going to go and snorkel, but I didn't, and I'll show you why in a minute. They've got quite a few wrecks there. There was a British tanker sunk by a U-boat in St James Bay. Up until a few years ago, they disposed of all their old vehicles by dropping them in the sea. So they took the oil and things out first, apparently, but I don't know if they still do this, but there seems to be a lot of old cars on people's front yards, so I don't think they do that anymore. Very difficult to see. I was going to go snorkeling, and then I went down and had a look at where you get on the boat to go snorkeling, and I changed my mind.
Try that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, the light's out, but it says change. So
Okay, that's
talk
good.
into it and see if it works.
Right, so try again. So this is where everybody came ashore on. Oh, it's off again.
It's working, mate. If you speak into it.
Okay, this is where everybody comes ashore from boats until they built the airport. And those four, even the Queen came ashore there, and Prince Andrew came to St Helena after the Falklands. But I really didn't fancy this at all, so I'm a very, very bad sailor. So they have these big rollers that come in February. So in the end, I decided not to go snorkeling. The other wildlife, is the famous wildlife, is Jonathan, who's the world's oldest land animal. He's 194 or thereabouts. He's actually a Seychelles tortoise, not a Galapagos tortoise, but he was a gift to the governor in 1888. And he's, as I said, he's about 194. So that's a royal visit. There's the Duke saying, "Have you come far?" So here's a Republican visit. That's us. He's a lovely old chap. He's very friendly. He's blind, and he gets fed every Sunday with his favourite foods to keep him healthy. He loves bananas. So as soon as he hears people come into his field, he lives in this big paddock in front of Plantation House, and he comes across, and he's very friendly and so pretty active. This is his mates, Emma and Frederick. He still mates with Emma, and she lays eggs, but none have ever hatched. So maybe his sperm count's dropped a little bit. You might expect that. But anyway, he lives a very happy life there. So this is Plantation House, built in 1788. It's been restored a couple of times. This is where the governor lives. So it was plantation. What they planted was taro, and they used that to supply the ships. It was originally the British East India Company who lived there. It's a lovely old building. I didn't expect to find a 18th century library there. The library goes back to the early 1700s. The oldest book there is about 1713. And some Preservation Society has paid for this American chap to live there for a year or two and help to restore the books. The climate's not been that kind to the books there, so he's training the locals there to do bookbinding. So yeah, it's a lovely old library. The Wirebird's a terrible photograph, but the best one we could get. This is actually what it looks like in real life. My son gave me this about 25 years ago. I brought a bit of St Helenian black olive back, which is an extinct tree, and made it an egg a few weeks ago. So that's the Wirebird. It's actually a plover. It's called a Wirebird because of the legs, obviously. And there's 630 other of them at the last count. And we saw a baby, which is, it's very well camouflaged, obviously, but apparently seeing a baby's not that common. Anyway, it's a national bird, and they're very proud of it. They built this One World satellite station just next door to the habitat, and people were kind of worried that it might interfere with their habitat. But they built a very strong metal fence around it, wire fence, and that keeps the cats out. So the wirebirds have started breeding inside the satellite station. There's not much goes on there to disturb them, so it's a win-win. They're also very proud of this little beast. It's called a spiky yellow wood louse. It's not actually a louse at all. It's not even an insect. It's actually a crustacean. But I didn't get to see one because the place where they live was closed. But they're very proud of it, and they even have a float in their annual parade. Hiking is a big thing at St Helena. All these blue tracks are called postbox walks, and they're called postbox walks because there's a box on a post at the end of each walk, and you get a stamp and you get a little book, and you can collect all the walks. And they're all, I would say, you can have any terrain you like in St Helena. We did a couple. This one's a very gentle sort of English countryside type of walk. And then another one we did half of because it got a bit hot and steep. It's completely dry and very little vegetation and very rocky and a bit tricky, but the people go there just to do all these walks. So bird watching is quite a big thing. There was 3 groups of bird watchers came through. One had just left, one was there and got stuck because the airport closed. And there's a company called Flock who takes bird watchers in groups from they go into Cape Town. They come across for a week, and they all wear cameras, camouflage, and so on. In terms of infrastructure, they have really good infrastructure considering where the place is. They have big diesel generators, and they have reticulated electricity all around the island. They have reticulated water. They have very good internet. They've had 400 years to build all this stuff, so it's pretty good. But they had no airport, and the reason is that there's no flat land on St Helena, at least there wasn't. And this is one of the world's great engineering fleets. There was a lot of opposition to the airport. Some people liked the isolation. They had a ship called the RMS St Helena. RMS stands for Royal Mail Ship, and it was the last one. And it called about 5 times a year from Cardiff, Cape Town, St Helena. Also went to Tristan and Ascension. But anyway, they started building the airport about 2010. It cost £300 million, about $700 million. Incredible piece of civil engineering. They justified it by saying it would bring in 30,000 tourists a year. What it turned out was that 30,000 tourists a year was the number needed to justify spending £300 million. A bit like the cycleways in Auckland, if we spend millions of dollars in cycleways, it'll save millions of dollars in car journeys and so on, which has never actually worked out. They get 2,000 to 3,000 tourists a year at Lyon, but they're trying hard to build that. They had, when we were there was meant to be the world's most remote marathon, but they had to close it because the airport was closed. Some of you will know the airport closed the week after we arrived there because the fire engine, 2 of the fire engines failed inspection, so we couldn't get off, which is a bit stressful. The St Helena government paid for our accommodation and gave us about $100 a day to live on, so that was okay. Anyway, the airport itself, so this is the airport. It opened in 2016, but it was 2017 before they could find pilots with big enough testicles to land in. It was meant to be British Airways, but they said, "Oh, the world's doing that." But South African pilots, some of them are brilliant, and so an airline called Airlink, which are a really good airline, they fly there. There's about half a dozen pilots who have accreditation to land at St Helena. But there's 2 problems. This is another view of the airport. The people who design airports said the runway should go that way, but they found some endangered spiders over here. My son reckons they were planted, but anyway. So they said, okay, well, we'll build the airport this way. And it's a bit like Wellington Airport. They had to build this embankment there, and they had to fill in thousands of cubic meters of gullies and so on. they land from here. They have to. It's only a visual landing because there's no instrumentation. And sometimes they get almost here and have to turn back again because the clouds roll in. But the other big problem, the one that makes it difficult for the pilots, are these rocks here. And you get crosswinds in the middle of your landing, too late to take off again, and so it's pretty tricky. So if the crosswinds are too high, they can't land. And most of the flights get in. We go in and out, but about 10% of them turn back. But this, they had to build the airport. The first thing to do is build a wharf, because they didn't have a wharf, and they needed the wharf to bring in all the trucks and diggers and so on. And then they had to build a 14-kilometre road up to here to build the airport. So it's amazing feat of engineering. They actually they moved about 430,000 trucks of fill, about 8 million cubic meters of rock and so on to build the airport. And these are some of the trucks and so on, grinding all the way up there to do it. It took about 5 years. I like old cars. I love Austin 7s. This is St Helena's first car in 1928, number 1, and they're now up to 7,000. I think my son's car is about 5,000 and something. And the photo was taken in 1962, which just shows you how long Austin 7s last. It was still going in 1972 and then it caught fire. Stamps are a big thing on St Helena. Still, people, if you ever collected stamps as a kid, you probably had a St Helena stamp in your collection. And that's the end. So there you go. You can share all that with your Any more questions? Or you want to get back to making soda?
What currency do they use?
The pound, but they have their own pounds, but you can use British currency there. Yeah, you have to be careful if you want to bring them back that you don't bring the St Helenian ones back. But I did discover that their coins work in parking meters in Edinburgh. So, okay, thank you.
The fuel problem is going to affect St Helena.
Well, funny you should ask that. I asked my son yesterday, has your petrol gone up? He said, well, why would it go up? The next shipment is not due until August. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? The fuel you've got,